Hi, welcome back to Books on the Go. I'm Anna. Sorry for my absence again. I really haven't been into a groove of doing videos this year. I hope you've all been well and had a good year. I thought I'd do a bit of a wrap up, not all of the books I've read in all of the months since my last wrap up, but just some recent reads. And it's been a year where I did finish reading all the books on my shelf, and so they weren't all necessarily standout reads because they were the ones that I'd kind of left on the shelf, perhaps for a reason, although some were brilliant, but it's finished strongly. So I have had some really good books just in the last couple of weeks. So in no particular order, I've really enjoyed Happy Go Lucky by David Sedaris. He's an author who is misanthropic and quite dry, but I find very funny, and he is a comic author. His take on life, where things go wrong or he observes things with his own unique way of looking at the world, is comical, not always funny. He deals with the death of his father, and there are sad moments and poignant moments, but I really enjoyed these essays and recommend them. I use it as a comfort read, so we did our comfort reading episode for the podcast recently, and this was one of my go-tos where, for some reason, if you're looking for an escape or a soothing, calming kind of read, I find being in his company comforting. I don't know why. Let me know if you feel the same. That's David Sedaris. A book that I had bought and been really meaning to read for a long time, Melissa Lucashenko, EDENGLASSIE. And this is set in the 1800s in Australia and dealing with a massacre of Indigenous people near the Brisbane, what's now known as Brisbane area on the east of Australia. I loved Melissa Lucashenko's Too Much Lip. It was really fast-paced, energetic, lively, quite funny at times writing, but dealing with very heavy issues, but in a very much story-driven way. EDENGLASSIE, I feel, is more issues forward, if that's a word. So it tells the story of an older lady, indeed an elder, who falls down at the beginning of the book, and someone eventually helps her, and she's in hospital, and her granddaughter comes to see her, who's quite an activist, and the grandmother has a different approach and way of dealing with things. And then it goes right back to, I think, her ancestors back in the 1800s, and it tells what we know is a bleak story about how Aboriginal people were treated by the white invaders or colonizers, the English, who settled in that area, and the wars that went on. So I actually didn't finish this. I found it felt more like, compared to Too Much Lip, it felt more like the characters were there as vehicles to sort of tell the story, the history of what happened. And I still think her writing is brilliant, and it is a story we all need to know, but I didn't enjoy it so much as a novel. And I spoke to Annie, and she said it really doesn't change, in the sense that if you're not enjoying it a third of the way through, you probably won't enjoy the next 2/3. So I have let this one go. That's EDENGLASSIE, but it's won so many awards. So please don't let me put you off. And as I say, it's a really important story, and we love Melissa Lucashenko. Then a completely different book, Emily Maguire, Rapture. So another Australian author, and I really enjoyed her book, An Isolated Incident. And Annie also loved Love Objects, which was her second novel. This is her third novel. It's not a story I would expect to pick up and enjoy. It's set in the 9th century, and it's about a girl called Agnes who ends up dressing as a man and becoming a monk, and then even further she ascends into the higher ranks of the Catholic Church back in the 800s. So she moves from Germany to Greece, to Athens, and then to Italy, and she ends up in Rome. And that all sounds quite dry, but it's a really interesting story, and the writing is so strong that you're completely captivated by Agnes and her view on the world and her experience of how she gets treated when she's a man, and the challenges of keeping up that facade versus how they would treat her if she was a woman, or if they knew she was a woman. And she's very well read because of the way she was brought up. So she's got an intellectual curiosity and a questioning mind. She's in touch with spirituality in different ways. So that might be when she's out in nature and she really examines what really is faith or being spiritual, or where is God. And in her, she has a more holistic view of that, or a more humanist view of that, compared to the organized religion. And she really, you really see the contrast between the excesses of the Catholic Church, and who proclaims that they are the pinnacle of God and religion and faith, versus her understanding of what her faith is. And it makes you think about, obviously, sexism, and although that's a subtle theme because of the time that it's set, so it's not a feminist book in the way a 1970s book might be a feminist book, but it's more, you draw those thoughts and conclusions from the way the story evolves. So it's subtle in that way, but strong, and she's a really good character. It's loosely based on, I think there was a pope called Pope Joan, who did exist and was actually a woman, which I hadn't known. And I even read this not really knowing that. I don't think you need to know that history, but that was part of the inspiration for the story. But the writing is so good. It made me think a little bit of Hannah Kent. So taking these stories of women in history that you never thought you needed to read about, and making them so compelling, and with a sort of an earthy poetry to her writing, which made me think of her, and a bit of Charlotte Wood as well. So if you like those authors, I think you'll really love this. And a lot of people have been raving about it. Annie had it as one of her top books of the year. So that's Rapture by Emily Maguire. A book that I bought, I will confess, for the cover, The Horse by Willy Vlautin, who has been around for a long time, but I had not read him. He's also a musician and a songwriter, and the Jason at Imprints said he's just a beautiful writer. So I bought it because of Jason's recommendation. The fabulous cover, and on the blurb on the back, it describes it as being a bit drawn from the tradition of Bruce Springsteen, but going back to Steinbeck. So I thought that sounded, in terms of an American book or an American sensibility, that's really strong credentials. And I think it does stand up to that. And my experience of this book is that I really admire it, and I think it's beautifully executed, and it does do what it says, and it's sort of a 5-star read in terms of the quality. I think the writing is really fluid, and the things that it makes you think about are quiet, but they're powerful. And it's about an older man, Al, who's in his 60s, living very remotely, 30 miles from the nearest town, and he's a sort of faded musician, or I don't know, failed isn't quite the word, but he hasn't achieved fame and success in that way, but he has kept writing his songs, and that's what keeps him going. But he's alone as we start the book, but then a horse turns up outside his house, and he has to decide how can he save this horse, and how would he do that? And it's sort of brings him a bit out of his shell, but the book is mainly him remembering all the events of his life. So it's a bleak feel to it. It's quite a melancholy, sad tone, and that stays throughout, but there are these moments of connection and friendship that I think lift it from that and give you hope. But my experience reading it was, I really admired it and would give it 5 stars for what it is, except my enjoyment level was more at the 3 stars, just because it's not necessarily the book for me. So I don't know what we do in that situation. I'd put it on Goodreads at a 4-star read, and I'm sure that there are many people who this would be right up their alley, and if it is, then it's a really worthwhile read, and beautifully executed. So I don't know where that leaves it, but let me know if you've read it. That's The Horse by Willy Vlautin. Then a stunning book, Bad Habit by Alana Portero, translated by Faye, Lethem. Sorry, I haven't got my glasses. I hope I got that right. And I bought this partly again because the cover's so striking, but Pedro Almodovar has blurbed it and said, I urge you to read Bad Habit. So of course I had to, and it does have that vibe of an Almodovar film. It's set in Madrid. It's about an unnamed narrator. It's told in first person, and she's a young trans woman. So we go from her childhood in a working class apartment block in Madrid, suburban Madrid, through to her teenage years, where she tries to explore her identity by going downtown to this part of the city that's inhabited by the queer community, and she finds her people, but it's a really rocky road. And then we come through to adulthood, so it's a coming of age, but it's this really stunningly written book and beautifully translated that stops you in your tracks at times, just with some of the poetry. And I'll read a little bit just to give you a sense of it. There's something after a football match where they all went, this rowdy crowd goes to a place that she considers quite sacred. And she says, I was horrified by the idea that the goddess, Sybil, for whom in the night of time the Corbantes danced and bled on the slopes of the Dindymon, Sybil, my queen, who stonily observed the sad path home from my own mysteries, was the centre of celebration for a pilgrimage of danceless men. She was the custodian of the emasculated, the hermaphrodites and the eunuchs, the mother of those who renounced grotesque masculinity and embraced the ferocity of women. So that just gives you a sense of it. There are so many other passages like that, but it's strong writing, but also really beautiful. I really enjoyed there were small acts of grace, small moments of grace in this working class neighbourhood that she grows up in, where people help each other, and you can sense there's a closeness underneath a very macho environment, a very macho culture. And another interesting dynamic was her parents really love her and really nurture her and look after her, and as their son. She's a boy when she's born, and they treat her very much like a son. And the problem is, despite how loving and home life she has and how well her parents look after her, they would not accept her true identity. And so there's this real conflict there where they're very much want her to be happy, but she realizes that they can't make that leap with her, so she's stifled. And so it's really poignant but hopeful as well. And of course she has these gorgeous mentors in the trans community, and they are wonderful characters, and you get to know them. And it's sad because I think it's still relevant today that this community is so stigmatized and so marginalized, but also hopeful. So, and just a really beautifully written and strong novel. So that's Bad Habit by Alana Portero. And now my current read, which I've just started and I think I'm into the swing of it now, is My Friends by Hisham Matar. So this was longlisted for the Booker. Hisham Matar wrote The Return a few years ago about his father, who was taken by the Gaddafi forces in Libya, and his search for his father, or his search to find out what happened to his father. He then wrote a short non-fiction book, a memoir called A Month in Siena, which I absolutely loved and I've spoken about before. We don't need to go on about that anymore. It was really one of my favourite books a couple of years ago. And this is a much longer book, My Friends, and it's about three friends in London, or they meet in London, but they've got connections with Libya, and I think it goes back in time to go through that friendship and how it evolves. It's been on my shelf and I've hesitated because it feels quite long and slow. I think it's one of those character-driven novels as opposed to plot-driven or pacey. And so I haven't been rushing to pick it up, but I think now that I've started, I'm into the rhythm of it, and it's quite beautiful, and it's almost a bit meditative because it makes you slow down a bit. So that's probably a good thing. But anyway, let me know if you've read it. I know a lot of people have really loved this, so I'm looking forward to getting more into it. That's My Friends by Hisham Matar. I'd love to hear what you've been reading, and I hope you all have a good holiday season, and see you in the new year. Bye.